Siren's leg bounced impatiently as the carriage swayed against the light breeze. She had been confined in that space for nearly 6 hours, and it was really starting to have a toll on her sanity. While her leg bouncing could easily be written off as an impatience to finally arrive at Hogwarts, in reality, she really had to pee. She refused, however, to request for the carriage to stop, as it would only delay her journey even more. They already left late that morning and had to take a detour to avoid a storm. An audible gasp escaped her lips as the long stretch of the bridge finally came into view. Then there was the clock tower, which at the moment seemed even more wonderful and beautiful than she remembered. Though high above the school, Siren swore she could see flashes of light from inside, and she wondered if a crossed wands duel was currently underway. What day was it? The 9th of October? A Friday. A duel would be very likely, and she was convinced the flash of orange she saw was that of a Confringo cast, though she couldn't help but wonder from whose wand. The carriage continued over to the bell tower courtyard, lowering down and landing on the cobble path in front of the large double doors. The moment the carriage stopped moving, Siren flung the doors open and jumped out. She was surprised the courtyard was so empty, though she supposed it was rather close to dinner, and likely that a good number of students were at Hogsmeade.
Impatient, are we?
Ms. Burton asked as she too climbed out of the carriage. Impatient and in desperate need of a lavatory, Siren admitted.
Then I won't keep you.
The woman flicked her wand to remove the luggage from the carriage, which was now just a suitcase and a single bag, even though Siren had been provided an entire new wardrobe. It had been a gift from Ms. Burton, as was the extension charm on both the suitcase and the bag. Siren could now fit anything she could ever need in one of these two vessels.
It's about time. You had been expected here nearly an hour ago.
Apologies, Headmaster. We had to avoid a storm and it caused us some delay. I was under the impression Professor Weasley would be meeting us.
Well, yes. She had been held up with some duties at the Ministry. Therefore, I am to get you settled. Come now, we have no time to waste.
Siren rolled her eyes, an expression that the finishing school had failed to rid her of, before turning to face Miss Burton. Without a moment's hesitation, Siren pulled her into a hug. I will miss you greatly. I cannot thank you enough for everything. Miss Burton gripped her shoulders firmly.
Should you need me, I will send an owl weekly. Just have your friends show you where they had been putting their letters. I expect you to keep me up to date on that as well.
She motioned toward the black markings currently hidden by a scarf she had tied meticulously around her neck. The other students would likely see it sooner or later, but she planned to put it off for as long as possible.
All right then, no time to waste.
Black's voice urged them along as Siren picked up her belongings. She nodded one last goodbye before walking through the double doors alongside Headmaster Black.
I am to take you to the hospital wing. From there, you will either settle yourself in, or you can wait for Professor Weasley to return.
Of course. Thank you, Headmaster. Siren nodded as they made their way through the corridor leading to Central Hall. As they walked through the doors, the pain in her abdomen reminded her she needed to find a lavatory quickly. As the witch's bathroom came into view, Siren breathed a sigh of relief. Excuse me, Headmaster. If it would be all right, I just need to step into the witch's lavatory.
All right. If you must, just be quick about it.
Although his words had given her approval, he had continued forward and up the stairs of Central Hall. Without the ability to wait another second, Siren disappeared into the bathroom. The water ran over Siren's hands as she watched the soap run into the sink. Her eyes flicked up, catching a glance of her reflection before her focus targeted on the black markings creeping out from behind the scarf. She sighed and adjusted the scarf once again. Finally content with the way the scarf was covering her neck, she made her way over to the door. She had just begun to push it open when it swung open in front of her and a body made contact with hers.
Oh, I'm so sorry,
The familiar sweet voice cut off as it was replaced with a gasp.
Siren!
Poppy squealed, throwing her arms around her and pulling her into a firm hug. Siren swung her arms around Poppy and did the same. Oh, Poppy! I've missed you so much.
When did you get here? Merlin, Siren, look at you. You are positively stunning.
Siren smiled at her friend, who was now holding her an arm's length away, looking her over. Although her hair was still pinned up in the way the Muggle school had required of her, a style she couldn't wait to be rid of due to the constant headache it provided her, Siren had taken the time to change into something more fitting for Hogwarts. She wore a long yellow skirt that hung gently from her hips and a black blouse that was a simple but feminine cut that she felt complemented her developing curves nicely. Look at me? Look at you! Much like she felt, Poppy too looked a bit older. Her hair was cut a bit shorter to frame her small face and complement her petite figure. The sight immediately reminded Siren of illustrations she had seen of fairies from the old Muggle books back at the orphanage. I actually only just arrived. The lavatory was my first...
Poppy, did you get a towel? Natty just stepped in the pumpkin joke.
Adelaide's voice cut off.
Siren!
She called, rushing forward and pulling her into a hug.
You're here!
Is everything all right?
Natty's voice came from the door now before another gasp.
Oh, Siren, it is so good to see you, my friend.
One by one, the squeals of excitement and commotion seemed to call more attention, causing the once empty lavatory to be crammed full of the friends she had missed while she was gone.
Is that who I think it is?
Wait, is that Siren?
Siren, she's back.
Smug. That was how Sebastian felt as he and Ominous made their way down the staircase of Central Hall. He had just finished a duel with Leander, who had requested yet another rematch, only to be met with the same outcome for the third time in a row. And now, he was on his way to Quidditch practice, where the thought of hitting a bludger at Leander would only fuel his motivation to practice better. So when the time came, he wouldn't miss. The boy had always acted like he was better than Sebastian in many ways. And the fact he could destroy him at dueling, and soon Quidditch, brought him a strange sense of pride. Screams erupted from the witch's lavatory, breaking Sebastian from his daydream as he watched a crowd swarming the area. He reached for his wand, pausing a moment before realizing that the screams were in fact squeals, and nothing he had to be worried about. Though he couldn't help but be overly curious about what could cause such a commotion. Sebastian watched, momentarily stunned as Imelda pushed through the crowd with a smile plastered on her face.
Get out of my way, all of you!
Imelda!
He heard a voice call and his heart stopped, his body instantly turning to ice. And then there she was, making her way out of the witch's bathroom, her arms outstretched. He watched her bring Imelda into a close hug, and he wondered when they had become so close. He knew they were friendly, but Imelda, of all people, was hugging her. Had he missed that last year? He supposed he may have missed a lot last year. She had defeated Ranrock in the basements of the school, and he hadn't even realized the real threat of it all until it was there. He felt the shame of how he treated her the year before engulf him once again. Her eyes danced across the sea of people happily crowded around her before they flitted up to Sebastian, frozen like a statue on the stairs. She somehow appeared precisely as he had remembered her, and yet wholly different. Her hair was pinned up out of her face in a seemingly intricate style. Loose strands of hair fell on either side of her round face, which had taken on both elegant and mature features that even he could see where he stood.
Well, I'm not going to just stand here and gawk at her.
Ominous smirked, letting his wand lead him the rest of the way down the stairs.
Despite Ominous's teasing, Siren's eyes were just as frozen on Sebastian as his had been on her. The boy that stood on the stairs was not the same boy she had last spoken to at the end of 5th year. He appeared bigger, broader. Was he really the same boy that sat hunchback over a pile of books for hours?
Siren, darling, it's about time you got here.
Ominous! Siren called, excitement flooding her voice as she looked up at the blonde boy that was walking toward her, wand to his side as he approached. Ominous had also grown dramatically. He towered over her now, his sharp jaw and narrow shoulders the opposite of Sebastian's broad features. He had a smile spread across his face as she made her way over to him. The sea of people around her had parted for him to come through, and she couldn't help but notice the hesitancy on some of their faces, especially Natty, who was currently looking at Ominous with a clear sense of unease. Siren, desperate to show these people the kind soul she knew, reached out a hand to him, confident his wand pulsing lightly at his side would pick up the action. She waited for him to put his hand in hers, which he did without hesitation before she placed it on her head. "Look how tall you are," Siren laughed, and even Ominous let out a twinkle of a laugh as he realized his hand stopped at his chest a good amount of space below his chin. Siren laughed along with him as she dropped his hand and pulled him into a hug. There wasn't even a trace of his previous rigidness she had noticed from the year before as he wrapped his arms around her, bringing her a comfort she'd been missing for the past few months. Family. The word swelled in her mind more as an idea than a statement. Ominous released her from the hug, giving her hands another small squeeze before stepping aside. Siren's breath caught as her eyes landed on the figure that had been standing behind him. The nearly 4 months they had been apart had been exceedingly kind to Sebastian. He had his robe draped over his arm and the sleeves of his white button-up shirt rolled up to reveal newly defined forearms. His tie hung loosely against his partially unbuttoned shirt, giving Siren a glance at the contours of a more sculpted chest beneath. His shoulders were noticeably broader, seeming even more so by his taller stature as he towered over her. Remnants of sweat shimmered on his brown hair that flicked out in all directions, aiding in the explanation of his unruly attire. Siren watched as his jaw worked, pulling her attention back to his face, which still held the rounded cheeks and flushed complexion she remembered, though his freckles that scattered over his features seemed more pronounced than the year before. Really, everything about Sebastian felt bolder, except for his deep brown eyes, which at the moment reflected the uncertainty she felt in herself as well. They stood there, motionless, a beat too long, which only succeeded in thickening the tension between them. It was clear Sebastian had the same feelings of hesitation that Siren felt stirring within her now. Although they had been communicating through letters, their last spoken words still hung in the air as if they had just been uttered. Siren watched as Sebastian's throat bobbed, his chocolate brown eyes melting into hers as though they alone could provide any and all apologies he wished to say. And perhaps they did, because a smile tugged onto her lips, an action that seemed to cut the tension between the two with ease. "Merlin, Sebastian, you've gotten tall as well. Look at me, Sallow, I have to crane my neck just to look up at you." Sebastian's face broke into a smile as relief flickered across his features.
I don't know, Song. It looks to me like you may have shrunk. Look at you. You are practically the height of a house elf.
A laugh bubbled through Siren, a sound even she hadn't heard in a few months. Sebastian opened up his arms to her. A question, she realized, as though uncertain if he deserved the same treatment as Ominous, as though he would even have to ask. Without hesitation, Siren practically leapt into his arms, wrapping her own arms around his neck as he pulled her tightly against him, his hands locked firmly around her waist. His cheek pressed against the top of her head as the familiar musky scent of wood, earth, and parchment filled her lungs. He placed a hand at the back of her head, pulling her closer against his chest as the warmth from his body engulfed hers.
I missed you,
he whispered softly, just loud enough for her alone to hear it, the soft rumble of his voice vibrating through his chest and against her heart. He didn't even need to say it. This one hug conveyed a greeting, an apology, and an "I missed you," all in one. Neither wanted the hug to end, both seemingly reluctant as they released each other from the embrace. Siren felt a shiver grab her as the bite from the chilly autumn air nipped at her skin. At least, that's what she told herself it was.
"Siren, you're here!"
Gareth's voice cut through the noise as he rushed forward and pulled her into a hug, practically spinning her around in the process.
"It's great to finally have my ingredient master back."
"Ingredient master?" Siren questioned as she steadied herself.
"Of course. Speaking of which, I have a proposition for you."
"Really, Gareth, I just got here. If you think for a second..."
Miss Song!
Headmaster Black's voice boomed, silencing the commotion. "Sorry, Headmaster," Siren called as she began to rush toward him. Realizing she left her bags in the bathroom, she turned around just as Poppy walked up to her with her suitcase and bag. "Oh, thank you, Poppy." Siren smiled, taking the suitcase. She went to reach for the bag, but Poppy stopped her.
Don't worry, I have the bag. I can walk with you.
Oh, Siren stammered. Are you sure? We are actually stopping up at the hospital wing first.
That's fine.
Poppy smiled up at her, understanding seeming to resonate in her eyes. Siren knew what the discussion in the hospital wing would entail, and she wasn't sure she wanted anyone there for that. But if anyone should know, Poppy would be the best one. I would love that. Thank you, Poppy. They both followed the headmaster as the groups of students finally dispersed.
Sebastian's gaze lingered as they ascended the stairs. He couldn't avert his eyes as Siren moved further and further away with each step. As he watched her, a realization struck, causing a pit to form in his stomach. They had changed her. There was no longer that playful sway to her hips as she walked that he had unknowingly become accustomed to. She walked slow and steady, her back straight as she followed after the headmaster. She smiled softer, and the light in her eyes shined noticeably dimmer. Was the Siren he knew still there? What had they done to her? What had the snake done to her?